Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar entitled Enhancing Efficiency, Leveraging Order API for Electronic Supply Chain. I'm Eric Miskell, publisher of EMS Now, and I'll be serving as the moderator today for this webinar. Before I introduce our speakers, let me just cover a few quick housekeeping issues. First and foremost, as you've probably noticed, all attendees are muted and you will remain so throughout the webinar. So feel free to make as much noise as you want on your end. The session is being recorded and will be made available to all registrants and to the industry at a later date. And we do encourage questions. So if you have any questions for our speakers today, we ask that you submit them using the question tab at the bottom of the screen. You can ask your question at any time, but just so that you know, we will not address them until the speakers have finished with their comments and the questions that we have planned. And my only ask then on the questions is please keep your questions focused on the topic of the webinar, that being the APIs for electronic supply chain. And I'm not sure, depending on the volume of questions, if we will be able to respond to all questions that are posed, but we'll certainly do our best and follow up with anybody who has an unanswered question hanging out there. So let me introduce our speakers today. We have joining us, we have Chintan Sutaria, CEO and President of CalcuQuote. And we have Nathan Prey. Nathan is the Manager, Digital Technology Office B2B with Digikey. So gentlemen, welcome to both of you. Thank you for participating today. Let's begin, Nathan, with you kind of at the 30,000 foot level. Why don't we just begin with, the term API. Why don't you've said before you have your own definition for it. Let's start there. How do you define API?
Yeah, so first off, great to be here. API stands just a simple acronym for Application Programming Interface. But the answer that I like the most, it's a predefined pattern of requests and responses intended to exchange data and functionality easily and securely. So in other words, it's just data moving from one computer to another. It's just a way to it's a way to facilitate that and to create that functionality. It's as simple as retrieving a price for a part, or a bit more complicated like scanning barcodes to retrieve full information about an order. So
well, then in the case of the application here, they add the modifiers to it, the order API or a quote or a search API. Can you kind of distinguish among those?
Yeah, so I mean, it's like I said, an API is just enabling a piece of functionality. So like a search API, it's intended to, it's very similar functionality to to going to a website, going to Google and searching, going to the Digikey website and searching for a component, versus an ordering API. It's actually intended to buy parts. You connect to our order API and you pass us through a list of parts and quantities. A package is going to show up at your dock, and then from there, then invoicing starts and all that. But yeah, it's like I said, it's a bit it's no different really than what I think a lot of us are familiar with EDI. It's an older technology. There's a lot of similarities between APIs and EDIs, and this is just one of those where it's a way to take an order for us.
Okay. And I think the distinction was made before by Chintan when we spoke, that with an order API, something's showing up at your doorstep, though, whereas with the quote or search API, nothing will be sent and you won't be, right? So
yeah, search API, you're requesting information, and order API, you're requesting the parts to be delivered.
Okay.
That's something that our development team learned the hard way when we accidentally ordered a bunch of parts. So.
Oops. So then what is the benefit of an order API for electronics manufacturing industry then, Nathan?
So I think there's several benefits, but the biggest to me is speed. And you've already gone through the process of selecting the parts that you're looking for. You know what you want to buy, and you could go to a website you could re-enter all that information, put it into a shopping cart and buy it that way. You could call in, talk to a sales associate, and buy it that way. You can even export it, into a file, email it to us, and we can take the order that way. But in each of those cases, it takes time. Somebody's doing something that's causing another layer of re-entry, whether you're putting it into our website or we're having to enter it into our back-end systems. Using an API, that order is transmitted electronically. It's entered almost instantly. There's no waiting. That not only kind of jumps the line in terms of getting your order into the system quickly. If you're waiting on stock, it reserves that faster than the other ways. But it also reduces errors. It reduces that potential for having miskeyed something or put a quantity in wrong, things like that.
Mm-hmm. So do all APIs then have those kind of common features and functionalities? Or I guess what I'm asking, are all APIs created equal? That's
a great question. So no, I don't think all APIs are created equal. That's the beauty of an API. It's a bit flexible. So, whether it's from Digikey or some of our other competition, that it can be a bit different from one to the next. And even within Digikey, from search to ordering to some of the order status, they're there to do different things. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, for us, once you get past the connection point, the ability to connect, to add, to move from one API to the next is a bit easier. You've gone through the hardest part, and that's connecting the first time, getting things set up and understanding, what application am I in? Where am I bringing that data from, and what am I putting it into? Once you've moved past that initial step, connecting to additional APIs and enabling additional functionality becomes a bit easier.
Yeah.
And maybe I'll add one more thing there is, if you think about APIs as just exchanging information, which Nathan said really well, then if you think about the analog version of that, so let's say I'm talking to a salesperson, there's different types of information the salesperson can provide, and that can also be differentiations of APIs, right? So for example, if I said, I want to buy this part at $1, the API could just respond back and say, error, the part doesn't cost $1. Or it could say, error, the part costs 90 cents. Do you want to, did you want to move forward? Or it could say, I'm going to pretend like I took the order, but actually not process it and not tell you that I am not processing it because $1 is the wrong value, right? So there's like varying degrees of functionality there as well, that can be a part of the validation and how that information gets processed, I guess. So.
Okay, that makes sense. So Nathan, you referenced EDI there. What's the difference then between API and EDI?
So there are a lot of similarities between the two, in the fact that they are data exchanges, just ways to move data. EDI is an older technology. It was built with supply chain in mind, and it was really built and designed to replace processes that involved sending paper. So things like purchase orders and invoices, that's where EDI really shines, is in that realm. It's also a bit more standardized than an API. So if you're moving from, connecting from one partner to another, it's a bit more standardized. The language is the same. API is a newer, more flexible technology. So, as we talked about, it's just a way to exchange data. If you can imagine that you need data for something, and doesn't matter what that data is, an API could be built to do it. So,
and the complaint I've heard in the past from EDI, past even currently on EDI, is it costs, right? There's a cost usually associated with that people find. I guess with APIs, you eliminate that as well.
Yeah, it eliminates like the per transaction cost. There's always cost involved when it comes to application development, and it's not that it's always completely free, but APIs, consuming an API from Digikey says, we don't charge anything back to those users. We don't ask for any payment at that point. So from that standpoint, it's free.
Got it. So are there limitations to using APIs instead of just sending an order via email?
There's some. It's going to depend on what your technical skill levels are, and how like I said, it takes development resources. You have to understand what processes you're trying to automate, and you have to be able to build, to connect to our APIs and build that into your system. So there's some limitation there, but as far as the the limitations versus the potential benefits, I think benefits absolutely outweigh any small limitation there is there. And as you talk about sending in via email, as I mentioned, that's a process that involves manual entry and time, and in this world, time is absolutely money. We can't, we're trying to enable things to move quickly and help customers to get to market faster and get that order placed faster, so that they're securing the inventory while we have it, as not missing out on those opportunities. So.
And as I hear you say that, I wonder too, then it's an accuracy issue too, then if somebody has some manual input, there's a potential for error in input then as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we all know human errors is part of daily life. We're not necessarily, completely adept at taking one bit of information and transferring it to another manually, whereas that's exactly what computers do very, very well. So.
Right. Yeah, very good. And then other than the obvious ones you've mentioned with speed and these, are there any other advantages to using the APIs that you want to mention before I move into Chintan here?
No, I think like I said, speed, data accuracy. Those are the two real big ones. That's the driving force behind a lot of this.
Yeah. Good. So Chintan, let's pull you in. How can you build a process to effectively use APIs?
It's a great point. And I think I'll piggyback off of what Nathan was just saying, is in terms of the benefits of APIs from a technical level, it's absolutely speed and accuracy, but I also think it enables better business processes. So if you think about, like, here's an example. If I wanted to buy airplane tickets, and the world I was living in was back when you had to contact your travel agent and do a booking that way, and pick up a paper ticket from the airport and all of that stuff. Well, if you digitize that and you say, okay, well, I'm going to automatically place a phone call to my travel agent, and I'm going to have somebody automatically go pick up the paper ticket and take a picture of it. Well, that's not really improving the process, right? So you can actually redesign the process and say, I can sit at home on my computer and have a ticket booked, and I don't need a piece of paper to go through airport security. Instead, I can have a picture on my phone. Like, that's a better process, right? And I would say same thing in APIs is that speed and accuracy. It gives you the ability to actually revisit how your business process is. So I'll give you an example. When we're talking about order API, a traditional purchasing process, what a buyer goes through in their workflow is they'll say, I have MRP demand, or I have a BOM I need to buy for whatever it is. I have 100 lines I need to buy. And they'll go to the first line item and they'll say, okay, I need to shop around, figure out where I'm going to buy this from. So I'm going to have a bunch of tabs open on my browser, exchange a bunch of emails, and I'll pick a source. And then I'll put that into a spreadsheet, and then I'll go to the next one, and then I'll go to the next one. They'll do 100 line items that way, right? And so for each one, they're making a sourcing decision. With the speed and accuracy that an API enables, you can actually treat it more like a funnel. So you can say, I'm going to push all 100 in and say, research all of these for me. And then I'm going to apply some selection criteria and say, select all of these for me collectively and optimize my decision-making process so that I don't end up with one PO for one line item with one supplier. Instead, I can say, oh, well, that shipping charge isn't worth it. Let me consolidate my spend to this one other supplier and reduce my shipping costs or whatever, right? So you can actually redefine your business process and say, hey, buyer, instead of going line by line, instead treat it like a funnel and say, I'm going to throw a bunch of things at the top and have something shake out at the bottom. Now, there will be exceptions that you're going to manage manually. That's okay. But by treating it like a funnel, you've actually used the APIs to streamline 80 to 90% of your purchasing. And now you just get to focus on the exceptions and the hard to find parts or the expensive parts, whatever it is. So I think there's absolutely ways to redefine the business process. And to that point, I would say from a technical perspective, an API is just about exchanging information. But from a, let's say like a business value perspective, think of it as how can you reshape your business process so that you're best leveraging the technology you have.
Okay. So what I hear you saying is really know what the process is you're seeking to kind of digitize in that sense before embarking on the API.
Absolutely. There's yesterday I was talking with one of my coworkers about this. There's this funny like video that's out there. Maybe some of you have seen it, but there's this guy carrying a bunch of stuff on his shoulder, and he's got a wheelbarrow in his other hand. And somebody comes along and says, "Hey, let me show you." So he puts the wheelbarrow down, puts the stuff in the wheelbarrow, and says, "There, now you can use this." And the guy goes, "Okay." So he picks up the wheelbarrow and all the stuff, starts walking with it. Right. And that's instead, you got to think about how you're going to change your business process instead of just saying, "Oh, well, here's a technology. I don't know how to use it. I'm just going to apply it to the same practice I had before."
Gotcha. Hey, Nathan, so from Digikey's perspective, what made Digikey kind of decide to create and implement an API?
Quite honestly, it's customer demand. It's that hunger for connecting to what's next. We're listening to our customers, understanding their business needs, and one of the things is it's as an industry, we've gone through plenty of inflection points and change points where in the early late 90s, early 2000s, it was the advent of the internet where the way customer service happened was different. Now self-service became a much bigger thing, and the closer we've gotten, EDI, like I said, it's been around a while, but APIs has shined a light on some things that are newer and faster. And as we get into it, we want to meet our customers kind of where they're at versus forcing them to always come to us. If you're capable of doing your business in a single platform, why do you need to leave and go out? We'd rather have that communication between us and our customer happen on their terms, and APIs is a big part of that. It's facilitating those functions and getting our business processes aligned with customer business process and doing things at the speed of digital. So
speed of digital, well said. So are there prerequisites then for implementing the API? Are there certain things, Chintan or Nathan, you can comment on this for.
Yeah, but Nathan, if you want to start, I'll add to it.
Yeah, is prerequisites. The only real prerequisite we have, and I know we're kind of talking about all APIs, but most APIs there's minimal minimal prerequisites. The API doesn't require you to have any sort of specialized software. It doesn't need a specialized programming language, but there are certain functions that as we classify those APIs, there are certain APIs, certain functions that we're automating that do have some prerequisite, like ordering. We require a customer to have a terms account with us, simply because we're not capable of taking a credit card order over API at this point. But other than that, it's pretty minimal.
Okay. Chintan, what would you add?
Yeah, I would add, so think of it from the perspective of the person that's actually going to end up being the beneficiary of that digital connection. I think there's a few things, right? So with Digikey, for example, you need a My Digikey account to be able to authenticate in, right? Like that's table stakes. You need to probably have some sort of business relationship. So we get customers a lot of times that are like, "Oh yeah, so we're going to just connect, everything by API, and we don't need to do anything with Digikey anymore." I'm like, no, that's not how this works, right? We're just helping exchange the information. Digikey is still shipping you the parts. And so you do still need to have a business relationship with Digikey, and they're going to be the ones sending you the parts and the invoices, and you're going to pay them. So that's definitely a big part of it, is maintaining those business relationships. And then the third thing I would say is, and this is really important, is you have to know what kind of data you want to exchange. So one of the things when it comes to the order API, we see this in a lot of EMS companies, is the hardest part isn't even issuing the order. Like, we can make that super seamless and easy. It's knowing what you need to buy. So you have to know what you're looking for, what information. So like a lot of times the biggest challenge is we'll go into a company and they'll say, well, I don't really trust my MRP data to tell me what to buy. Oh, well, how do you do it? Well, you kind of just, it's you have to have a feeling for it. Well, okay, you can't automate feelings. And so that's why, we had to come up with solutions for that part of it as well, where, okay, we can help you with optimizing your inventory and figuring out what the net demand is. So then through an automated fashion, we can say, here is your net demand. Now let's push those into order API type transactions. So I would say having an account, having a business relationship, and then knowing what you want to do with the data.
Yeah, and I can even piggyback off the business relationship side of it. With an API, the intent is to automate as much as possible, but it's never going to reach 100%. In terms of that, you still have to have conversations with people from time to time. There's always exceptions. There are always opportunities that are outside of what an API can handle, and that's really the intent of automation and digital connections in this case. Is let's automate away the things that take our time but don't add a ton of value. Let's automate those and let's move those away, and let's allow humans to be human. Let's allow the humans to do the things that we're great at, and that's the conversation and the relationship and the strategy behind it. So
So listen, two follow-ups to that, and maybe Nathan, for you, with all the, a lot of people have tried to bring solutions in the last few years to kind of help with the supply chain challenges that have existed. Can anyone just simply establish an API and connect with Digikey, or without your kind of permission or acknowledgement?
Absolutely. Our platform is self-serve. So to Chintan's point, you need a My Digikey account, which is pretty easy to get. Go and provide us some information, and you're logged in and ready to go. But from there, it's browse the APIs that are available, take a look, and begin playing around. It's available free for public use, but once you get past that initial development, then there are some conversations that have to be had. There are there's some limits on what you can do with the free version of things before a conversation has to be had and we get into production levels.
Okay. And what about the whole, go ahead, Chintan.
I was just going to add, I think one of the most common things that we see is anybody can register for an API, but as you get into a more production use case, it's, how many API calls can you make per hour or per day? Or are you going to get to see all of the information that would be, if there's preferred pricing or something like that. So there are certain things like that I, go through approval levels before you can install it in a production use case.
Okay. Yep. The next, what about security within that? The security protocols for the exchange of information, especially, maybe with the initial free one, it's not there, but as you're establishing an API and do that, there is going to be some secure data being transmitted at some point. What are the requirements there? Or are there standards?
Nathan, you want to take this or you want me to?
I was going to say, I could probably speak to ours specifically, but I'll defer to you. You guys as consumers of our APIs, I think are more familiar with, those security standards up front and, how you deal with them.
Yeah, well, and the reason I was kind of thinking I could take this one is because a lot of our customers, so we have, thousands of people using the APIs through CalcuQuote, and there is that authentication step, right, where you have to have the My Digikey account or whatever. And so this does create confusion for our users sometimes, because it's like, wait, why do I need to put in something for the API to work? And so the easiest way I would explain it is, if you think about you're still authenticating yourself in. A good analogy to use would be like when you log into your bank account, you have to put in a username and a password. But then sometimes it also says, hey, I need you to do two-factor authentication. So, that kind of thing. There is an API version of that same concept. So the technical term is OAuth 2, but basically it's using this like expiring session where you say, hey, you haven't used this in a while. I need you to re-authenticate yourself or something. And the reason we get so many questions about that, and this isn't Digikey specific, I know like there's a lot, that's a very fairly common standard to use a lot too. What that does is it requires every once in a while, you have to re-authenticate the API and make sure you are who you say you are, because worst case scenario is you have this order API key and now somebody has hijacked it and started ordering parts on your behalf, and you don't want that, right? So, or there's a computer program with a bug in it that's just legacy code that's sitting out there continuing to do things that you weren't expecting it to keep doing. So, not to say that that's likely to happen. It's I would say, probably even far more secure than username and password type authentication. But yeah, in terms of security, authenticating yourself into it is a very important step.
Yeah, you make a good point. I mean, it's from a Digikey standpoint, we consider our APIs to be incredibly secure, and it's exactly that. When you're placing an order, you want the assurance to know that the order is coming from you. We know it's coming from you. You know, that connection needs to be that connection needs to be trusted, and that's, you know, that's a big piece there.
One thing I'll say just for the audience, there's a lot of companies out there that sometimes they'll have, let's say, like rogue My Digikey accounts. So this buyer has made their own My Digikey account, but it's not connected to the company account. So they're seeing different price and availability information than this person, or they're getting different terms, whatever it may be. And so that's one of the things that's really important, is making sure that, you know, all your buyers, for example, when they authenticate in, are linked to the company account, so they get whatever is the company relationship, not just their own independent relationship with Digikey.
Okay.
Yeah, that's back to that relationship point. You know, you can't automate us away completely. So
Yeah, try as they may, you're still going to be there. So how do you make sure then to tie the information from the API into the ERP? How does that happen?
So I think we've, you know, I think the previous question answered a big part of that. You know, it's that authentication piece. It's that security layer that is what connects things in a one-to-one manner. And once that's done, you know, the data coming in through APIs is directly placed into our ERP, and it's mapped. Again, we know exactly who you are. So if it's search, we're making sure that whatever information is going out is applicable to you. If it's ordering, we know that order comes from you, and that's mapped in appropriately.
Okay.
And maybe on the flip side of that, from if you're an OEM and an EMS company that's using the API for your business processes, I've seen it done in a few different ways, and I would say there's varying degrees of maturity to that process. So like the most basic thing that a lot of times our customers will first approach us about, not knowing that there is such a thing as an order API even, is they'll try to automate an old process, right? So we've had customers come to us. I'll give you a very simple example. Is they'll say, hey, I want to run APIs. I've heard about APIs. I want to run APIs against my inventory list in my ERP, and just every day go through and update the price and lead time of every part. I'm like, no, you don't want to do that, right? Because you have 40,000 parts in your database, and you don't want to be hitting 40,000 times every single day to get updated price availability information when you're only really buying 2,000 of those parts in any given day. And so that's kind of like, I would say, the least mature version of adopting an API is to say, just feed raw data into my ERP, and I'm still going to then process everything manually, which means I'm going to manually create the PO, export it to PDF, send it to Digikey. Digikey is going to have to use some OCR or something to turn it into digital data to be able to process, right? Like you're back to carrying the wheelbarrow around. So that doesn't make sense. But it's still better than not having it. I think a more sophisticated version would be to say, hey, when my MRP runs, I want to take that net demand, use the order API, execute the orders, and then push those purchase orders that were digitally transmitted as a carbon copy or as a, you know, duplicated PO in my ERP, so I can receive against it, pay against it, all that stuff. So my ERP still remains the source of truth, but I need some application, whether it's my ERP, whether it's a middleware, whether it's a CalcuQuote product, to be able to transmit that order, get confirmation that the parts are on their way, and then push that into my ERP as a system of record. So
Good.
Yeah, in terms of integration of the ERP, there's several different ways to do it, but I think the most mature way is to say, execute the order, and have my ERP reflect things that happened in the real world, rather than trying to push raw data into the ERP and then carry on as if you're in a manual world.
Right. Good. Thanks for that clarification. That's good. So could you walk us through kind of a typical workflow of placing an order using the API?
Yeah. Maybe this might be an interesting way to do it is, what if I start with talking about like, this is what a buyer goes through. And then Nathan, if you could pick up Digikey received API call, and here's what happens behind the scenes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So buyer, let's pretend that they're using the CalcuQuote world, right? That's the world I know best. So this is unbiased, but I would say the most mature version of a process you could have. So if you start off with your ERP has data about demand, it has data about what stock you have, what POs you have open, knows all of that stuff. Then it goes into something we called MSP. Basically, it nets out all of that, does kind of a function of what an MRP would do, but it also overlays supply chain parts, price and availability data. So it says, in addition to all of the open POs and inventory and demand that you have, I'm going to overlay all of the supply chain data I have. So you're essentially treating your suppliers as your warehouse. It's just the parts are at Digikey's warehouse instead of my warehouse, but they're still parts I can use in formulating my MRP function. Right. So it goes through all of that process, and then it comes up with a calculation. It says, here are parts that we know are available in the supply chain that you are able to buy. We know what the price is. We know what the availability is. We know what the lead time is. This is all real-time data for you. Now, would you like to move that forward into a purchasing flow? So it says, okay, now I can go into purchasing. So then Shop CQ takes over, and it says, okay, let me go through, validating that the price is accurate, turning that into purchase orders, and then using the order API to execute those orders. And usually that process goes through a few things, right? So you have to have selection criteria. So you say, I want my most preferred suppliers. I want to choose a supplier that has stock on hand. I want to minimize my excess, whatever your decision criteria as a buyer are. So that pushes it forward into this PO bucket that you then say, I want to send this forward. At the point that the buyer says, I have a complete PO, I want to send it, there's basically a button that says send to Digikey by API. They click it, and an API call is made. The response we get is a Digikey sales order number. So it says, got your PO, here's your Digikey sales order number. And that puts it into a queue of, now you have POs. The other thing that would happen in parallel is sending that PO into the ERP system. So a copy of that PO gets created in the ERP system, so that your ERP now has record that we've issued a PO. We've gotten a sales order number back. Here's the PO number that we issued. Here's the parts on order, the quantity, the dates, all of that stuff. And that's where the buyer's journey, it's not over, because of course you have to wait for the parts to arrive for that process to close, but that's where probably Digikey now picks up.
Yeah. And then, once you've hit that, you made that decision, hit that button to initiate that order transfer. From that standpoint, it's placed into our order processing queue. Parts are added to the order, ship methods added to the order, payment methods, customer, information, everything that would constitute, what builds an order. And typically we've got enough information right up front that there's, nothing that stops it. It goes direct to our product distribution center for fulfillment. If anything does arise, if a part happened to be out of stock, or there was any sort of data discrepancy along the way, land with a sales representative, and that would be cleaned up in action. But once it's in our system, stock's reserved, everything is then at that point considered secure until the order is finally passed to the distribution center, and then at that point it's picked and packaged and put on truck or plane and delivered as quick as it can be, or as quick as it's needed.
Okay. Hey, one of the issues I hear from a lot of the EMS I talk to, especially with this, is they want to make sure they get the best price, right? So Chintan, is that when you were talking there saying the criteria, their preferred providers, all that, is that one of the options? What is the lowest price, or how does that work?
It is. And in fact, Digikey, this is a great point to bring up. couple things. One is, so Digikey has the search API, the quote API, and the order API. And then we haven't gotten into order status tracking, but there's that too, and plenty of others, but that's kind of the purchasing flow. So the quote API actually creates some sort of record in Digikey's system so that Digikey knows that they quoted you this part at this price. Now, that price could be subject to change over time, but what CalcuQuote does is it logs that quote ID. And so when you go into the purchasing flow, it'll reference back and say, was that the best price I've gotten in the last, I think it's like 30 days. So if not, then what is the price today? And so it'll do that comparison, right? I don't think we call it the discount double check because that's trademarked, but it's basically that, right? It's making sure that in your recent history, is this the fairest price you were able to find? So that does happen automatically. It's seamless to the user for that to happen behind the scenes. The other thing I would add is it's not just about the price. Sometimes it's about how real time the data is. So maybe Nathan, if you could speak to, I get this question all the time as well. Can I trust when it says there's parts in stock? Is it actually in stock, or how outdated is the information? Maybe that would be an interesting thing for people to know as well.
Yeah, when you're talking about looking up price and availability and kind of searching our system, our API returns information that is, consider it real time, in all, for all intents. It obviously it could be maybe a second or two old, but when you're pulling information from Digikey, it's real. It's the information that we have in that moment, and parts obviously are subject to fluctuation as stock is moving in and out of our distribution centers, but what you're getting is real.
Okay.
I knew that. I just wanted you to say that for the record for everybody. Believe me when I say it.
You're just setting it up for me. Yeah.
Very good. Very good. So what are some success stories you've seen kind of in implementing and using this? And, Chintan or Nathan, whoever wishes to share, are there any stories that you can share? You've referenced a few examples if you've been speaking, but yeah, as far as implementing that whole process, can you tell any stories?
Yeah, from my side of things, without calling anybody out specifically, we've got a handful of customers that have automated a significant amount of their purchasing and receiving processes, where utilizing API, they're searching for components up front, so they're getting accurate price and availability in the moment. They're making those buying decisions quickly. They're ordering, within that time frame too. They're placing orders by API, and then once the orders are packaged and shipped, they're using our order status APIs to be able to understand when is the order shipping, what are the tracking information, where's that package at, and when it does land on their dock, they're utilizing we've got APIs that you can scan a barcode off of a pack slip and get information about that entire order. They're using it to automate a big portion of their receiving process as well. So they've really stepped into it and really kind of taken their processes to the next level. And to your point, Chintan, they're not just taking old processes and pulling raw data in and trying to back to almost lift and shift old processes into new technology. They're reimagining as they go through and looking for that optimal route.
Okay.
Absolutely. I think there's definitely several cases that we've seen where a significant amount of the purchasing activity is able to be automated. And there's always this question of like, well, what's everyone going to do with their free time? Based on the last 3 years, it's look for parts, right? Like you can spend more time looking for the parts that aren't available and, solving supply chain problems instead of sitting there doing data entry work. But absolutely, there's so many cases of how I'll say APIs broadly, but also specifically like the order API has been super helpful in streamlining efficiency. And the second thing I would say is we talked earlier about accuracy. The number of times you hear about like, oh, well, I sent this PO, but I had a typo in the part number, or, they know what I meant because I wrote something in the notes field, but there's this discrepancy of what the description is on my PO versus what the part number is. And like all of those types of things in terms of accuracy, they just slow things down, right? Because if I go to place a PO and I sent it manually, and then somebody has to contact me to say, hey, I had this question about your PO. Well, a few hours could have passed before I get the email, and then a few hours pass before I get to it again. You've just delayed by a day a purchase order that a job could be waiting for. So I think there's definitely an accuracy advantage that ties into the speed. In terms of like actual success stories, there's a few like really prominent use cases that I think benefit from real time. So one is if you're a quick turn business, right? So your standard turn time is to say, I want to get this back in my customer's hands as a finished assembly super fast, and I'm talking like a couple of days. Then in that case, an order API absolutely makes sense. You got to measure in seconds and minutes, not hours and days. So from a quick turn prototype, like that kind of environment, absolutely super helpful. Which, by the way, there's this calculation we used internally of like what things are worth automating, and it's where the transaction cost is high compared to the value of the activity. If you're spending $1 million, then it makes sense to do some due diligence and talk to a person and do something about it. If you're buying a $5, reel of parts, it's like, why are you wasting anybody's time with this, right? It's just buy the part and just move on with it. Because even if you shop around and negotiate, it's like, okay, for $5, you got it at what, $4.90? What was the 10 cents worth to you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think there's that. The one that really comes to mind is there's this customer that we were working with that implemented this whole suite of from demand planning all the way to order execution, and they were able to they were so far behind on purchasing that they were able to actually do more in a week after going live than they were in the previous several months in terms of purchasing activity. Like they got caught up, and their purchasing team for the next several weeks could just focus on, here's parts that are out of stock, here's parts where we need alternate approval, here's parts that we need to go to third-party sources, whatever it is, instead of just, I got to go through keying in my data all day and I don't have time to get to the problem stuff. That's too hard for me to go focus on. So, which means you have an overall more challenging day, but it's what, as a buyer, you like to do compared to sitting there keying data.
Yeah. It's interesting because when I was touring some EMS, I was asking questions about this, and you both have spoken to this issue where the API takes it so far, but there's still a real reliance on the human element behind it too, right? That knowledge, that experience, and especially when negotiating, and those relationships that may have been fostered over a period of time working with the different suppliers to be able to know what's where, how, maybe what buttons to push to move some things at times. So there is a balance here. It's not all API, all manual.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
One of the more common ones that we see is, especially in the US, flow down requirements is a common one, right? Like an API can't interpret your notes. So if you write something into a notes field and say, hey, I need this to be this way, then it's like, well, the API reads specific fields in specific ways. It can automate human interpretation. Now, okay, maybe somebody's going to chat in and say, well, chat GPT. Okay, yes, but we're not there yet. So, and I don't think we're going to be there in the near future.
Yeah.
So.
We'll leave Chat GPT out of it. Listen, real quick to the audience out there too, getting to the point, about to wrap up kind of the pre-planned questions here, and we'll open it up. So I'll encourage any of the audience who may have questions they'd like to pose to either Chintan or Nathan now would be a good time to get them in there, and I'll be reverting to those shortly. So you've talked about success stories. Talk about the challenges that a company would experience in trying to implement this, right? So there've got to be challenges associated with this type of undertaking. How would you speak to that?
I mean, so aside from the technical challenges, those can be worked through. We've got teams of technical support that can help a customer kind of get through that point of the technical piece. The real challenge, and I think we've talked about it a bit, is understanding what you're trying to do, very clearly defining what is the process that you're coming from, and ignoring what you think and sitting down and really laying out, what does that ideal process look like, and then what do I need to make that happen. if you start at the API itself, it's probably not going to be as valuable as if you start with the process, understand what you're trying to do, understand where your pain points are, and then come back and say, okay, is there an API that fits? Is there something that can provide that bit of data in that moment that can help with that process? And 90% of the customers that we deal with, they come in and they start getting price and availability, because that is, the quoting process is one of the most painful when it comes to the amount of time that goes in and really what you get out of it. And so getting accurate data in quickly without having to go from website to website is really valuable in that realm. But we've had plenty of others that have identified other pain points and said, you know what, the hardest thing for me is understanding, once the order's placed, where do I get that information? How do I know when it's shipped? How do I know when it's going to be on my dock? And those are things that we've got API functions for as well. But that's kind of the key to it, is sit down, think about where your pain is, and how do you, in the most optimal way, resolve that, and then look to see what's available. And if there's not something available, reach out. Those are opportunities that, API is flexible. It can be, if new things can be created, we can help support all that.
One thing I'll add from my perspective is one of the most critical things that I think drives CalcuQuote's success is that we like to say this about ourselves, is we are people who came from the industry that realized there are software solutions for the problems the industry faces. So we are software people, but we're not software people that thought the electronics industry was sexy. It was the other way around. We thought there's problems in the electronics industry. What's the best way to solve these? And let's get into software, because that's the best way to solve these problems, right? And so the reason I say it that way is because, to Nathan's point, like a lot of it is a consultative conversation of, okay, what are your business objectives? How do we add value to this process? Because I could sell you software all day, and if it's not adding value, it's not really doing anything for you. And so from my perspective, it's really nice when a customer says, hey, we want to sit in a room with you for a day and go through our entire process to figure out where are all the inflection points where you can make a real difference by applying technology. So there's, let's say, because I keep using analogies here, it's like we want to be the doctor to do the diagnosis first before talking about the software, wherever we can be, because we found in numerous cases that's a much better formula for success long term.
Good. I'm going to revert to a question that was posed from the audience. You've touched on some of this, but maybe you can elaborate a bit. What are the plans in the industry to use APIs to improve the purchase order status, such as shipments, stock changes, etc.? I forget which one of you referenced kind of the status updates. Maybe Chintan, it was you, but either of you, please speak to that.
Yeah, I'll start. We definitely do use the order status API from Digikey. The way we've applied it is after you've issued an order, you can go in and see the status of the order. So it'll periodically ping to see, what's the tracking number, has it arrived, that kind of thing. So you can keep up with orders that are outstanding. That's super helpful because you can get into a mode where you're anticipating any supply chain challenges rather than reacting to. So a lot of times we'll see a standard process that, again, I would say is probably not a great approach, but it's a common approach, is I have an expediter who says, I have a list of all parts that were supposed to arrive yesterday but didn't. And today my job is to go through that list and call suppliers to see what's the status. Well, great, but you're already late, right? And so it's much better to be proactive about it. And the order status API definitely helps with that kind of stuff.
Okay. Nathan, anything to add? Or
yeah, I think we've touched on a number of things. Status of an order is something that CalcuQuote's taking advantage of. We have other customers using it as well. Stock changes, these are, I talk about, these are, it's about what functions you want to automate, and changes in delivery date and changes in requested stock, things like that, changes to a purchase order. We can, we currently as Digikey, we have functionality that can support that as well. If you're talking stock changes of, in stock, out of stock, to Chintan's point, looking for, updating your entire catalog every day isn't maybe necessarily the way to go about it, but understanding what you need today and then understanding how much of that, how much is available there, that's a much better way to understand, as stock is improving or changing in the industry.
Okay.
And one thing, if I can kind of broaden, because I see the question now, and it's about maybe the industry at large, I'll add that, and Nathan's heard this from me, so it won't be a surprise, is if I could wave a magic wand of what's the future of this order status stuff is, I think push notifications would be super helpful for the industry at large, right? To say, hey, here's a status update on your order. The stock position has changed. The price on this has changed. The life cycle of this component has changed. Like, any kind of push notification like that can be super helpful for anybody, because you can't be constantly scanning the supply. That's not an efficient use of resources. It's not an efficient use of APIs. So I would say one of the things that we do in CalcuQuote, I think we do really well, is working with our partners to say, like, here's what we think would be really beneficial to our hundreds of EMS companies and OEM companies that are using our products, is to have this functionality. So I like to think that we go back to Digikey as well as our the industry at large by saying, like, here's ways that we can all be working better together, which is maybe a good time to plug. We have a conference in November. You guys should come if you're not planning to.
Yeah, well, and that's a good point, because, I mean, the concern in the industry from the EMS is they're all sitting on inventory waiting for golden screws, as they're called, to move that out, right? So they're all curious, when am I going to get it? When am I going to get it? So they can plan their operations accordingly. So that must be the push notifications that you're referring to, right, Chintan?
Yeah, exactly. Or something has changed with your order. We have a stocking issue, whatever it is, being proactively notified instead of having to go ask the question.
Yep. Yeah, I think it's something that's, it's on the horizon for our industry. I think it's something that's probably coming sooner rather than later. But I do think we're probably, as an industry, a bit away from having widespread availability of something like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
So we talking within a year or 2 years? What do you think, Nathan?
If I'm staring into my crystal ball, I think it's, if you're talking widespread, it's probably 3 to 4, maybe 5 years out. I do think you'll see some early adopters well sooner than that, but not at a scale wide enough to get and to maybe have mass adoption.
Okay.
Which I should add, I mean, even in terms of when we talk about order API, there's a handful of distributors today that have order APIs, but in general, the industry today compared to 3 years ago is now on board with, I don't know any distributors that are saying, oh, order APIs, that doesn't make any sense for us, right? Whereas 3 years ago, it was like, I don't know, we'll see. So yeah, which arguably it was the same exact thing that happened on the component search stuff when we first started the CalcuQuote businesses. I remember a lot of conversations with distributors that were like, are you crazy? Why would anybody want to do this? And now it's like, it's a normal thing to search components by API.
Yep.
Good. So that's good. Here, let me and again, to the audience, we're about to wrap up here. So if you have a pressing question you absolutely want to ask to either Chintan or Nathan, now is the time to pose it. They've been very good and very forthcoming, but there may be something we didn't touch on. So please ask now. But as I'm waiting for that, let me just ask, where can people go to learn more about APIs, more about your processes? Who can they speak to? Kind of what tech support is available? Nathan, you referenced the tech support there within Digikey. Kind of speak to that for anybody who's heard this and wants to kind of take it to the next step. How do they do that?
So for Digikey specifically, we've got information available on our website. It's actually linked to from every page in the header and footer of the site. It's easy. Look for digital solutions, and you're gonna find our offerings and availability. There's contact points that are on there to help get the conversation started. And then from a development standpoint, we have, like I said, a self-serve developer portal. We've got technical support that's available through there. We're here to help help in the journey any way we can.
Gotcha.
And I'll add from CalcuQuote's perspective, we try to make it as seamless to our customers as possible. So you don't even have to know how to spell API. You can just start using the application out of the box and the APIs and everything. As long as you got an API key, it gets connected. But a good time to brag about our support, because you can chat with us. You can try it on our website right now. Real-time support with actual human beings happens all the time. So that's available to you if you do have any further questions about how CalcuQuote uses APIs.
Yeah. And Chintan, since you made the pitch for your upcoming show, why don't you just tell people real quick, kind of review that?
I get to do my plug. Okay. Yes. So CalcuQuote hosts an annual conference where we get together industry leaders, executives of OEM and EMS companies, distributors. Nathan, I believe you're going to be there as well.
I absolutely plan to. Yep.
Yep. And so it's just a way where we get people together to talk about what are challenges the industry is facing, how do we collaborate together better as a group, how do we define common ways of working that are beneficial to the industry. We did it last year. We had, I think it was about 60 different companies there in Dallas. It was in August, so it was super hot. This year we chose November because it'll be hopefully better temperatures. Yeah, really great feedback from the past, and I expect more of the same this year.
Okay, thank you for that. Oh, somebody just put a promo code for
plugging.
There we go. Very nice. So you got a discount. Grab that fast. Since we do not have any more questions and we're reaching the end of the hour, I just want to say thank you to both of you gentlemen. This has been excellent. I've certainly learned quite a bit in the process. So thank you for that. I'm sure the audience appreciated it. And to the audience, this has been recorded. So you will be receiving a link from CalcuQuote for this, and it'll then also be broadcast somehow to the industry. So be looking for that too. And please share it with all your friends and family. So thank you very much. You all have a good day.
Thanks, Eric.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Eric.
Bye.